want to introduce our first speaker. He is an internationally renowned political rapper, a veteran pro-Palestine campaigner. His name is Kareem Dennis, but most of you know him as Lowkey. My dear brother, Kareem, the floor is yours, akhi.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah yansur sha'bina b'Falastin wa yantaqim min kull al-zalimin. Inshallah. The reason we are where we are today is Al-Aqsa. And it is important we have a clear-eyed perspective on what Israel's objectives are vis-a-vis the first Qibla. When we see footage of the ferocious assaults on Palestinians within Al-Aqsa, often it is presented to us decontextualized and out of any clear grounding in what the wider issue is. The wider issue is that for several decades, the political entity of Israel, the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Education have been funding a movement with the explicit stated objective of replacing Al-Aqsa with a temple. The belief is that this temple existed 2,000 to 3,000 years ago and is a perfect example of what Yusuf al-Kabir called militant archaeology. These organizations are so deep in their understanding of what they will do to Al-Aqsa that they have built models of how Al-Aqsa will look after it has been demolished and replaced with this temple. They have a massive gold menorah next to the Wailing Wall, which the intention is for that to be installed. This funding has not only come from the Israeli Ministry of Education and the Israeli Ministry of Culture, it has also come from the Deputy Defense Minister within the Israeli regime. You've even seen funding for this organization come from Henry Swiker. Now, Henry Swiker is a billionaire who not only funded that organization, but also funded Tommy Robinson, the David Horowitz Freedom Center, which employed Tommy Robinson in this country. The Temple Mount movement, as it's known, is led by Yehuda Glick, who is formerly of Israeli intelligence. They have widespread support, including from the Israeli ambassador to Britain. Now you may ask, what relation does this have to Gaza? The answer is in 2021, Ma'arakat Sayf al-Quds. During that period, you had established a deterrent force in Gaza which directly confronted Israel's attempts to take over Al-Aqsa. For that very reason, there are two key aims of this current war on Gaza. Number one, that is disabling the deterrent force that comes from Gaza. And number two, that is expanding and achieving the maximalist, fantastical aims of Greater Israel and pushing those Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai Desert. These are the two objectives. The threat against Al-Aqsa, of which there is complete clarity about not only throughout the region but also throughout the world, less so in this country, is that within the next 5 to 10 years, those steps will be taken. What is the pretext that Israel will use for the destruction of Al-Aqsa? Will it be that there are weapons within one of the masajid and there has to be shelling of that location? Will there be another pretext that Israel will use? There is clarity amongst Palestinian forces in the region that this is Israel's end game. And ultimately, we are in a position where we can say that our great-grandparents' generation, they lost Yafa and Haifa. Our grandparents' generation, they lost Al-Quds and Gaza. Our parents' generation, they won back Gaza and South Lebanon. Will we be the generation that loses Al-Aqsa?
Never!
These are the stakes. These are the stakes. And they are deadly, deadly serious and very well organized, sophisticated, and well funded. When you look at this organization, the Temple Mount movement, the most well-known organization within them is the Temple Institute. And their information and their intentions towards Al-Aqsa are very well documented and available on the internet. Now, the relationship between this organization and the alleged state of Israel is so close that according to an Israeli army investigation of 2013, conscription an alternative to conscription can be taken by women with Israeli citizenship to join that organization rather than joining the army. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? That the political unit is facilitating membership of an organization that wants to destroy Al-Aqsa rather than joining the military, and has been doing so for at least a decade. This is major and this is serious. Unfortunately, within this country, we have seen a very successful campaign to silence people's ability to speak about what is happening with clarity. But let's be clear. According to UN Resolution 3246, armed resistance against foreign occupation is a right. It is legitimate for any group of people that are exposed to a foreign military occupation. And while we currently are within a political unit that defines Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism, we have a government that represents ostensibly around 67 million people. Okay, fine. The US government has the same position. Ostensibly, they represent 340 to 360 million people. Okay, fine. The European Union has the same perception. Japan has the same perception. What about a country like Switzerland? Who is more neutral than Switzerland? The Swiss government represents around 10 million people and does not designate Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. The Turkish government represents 80 million people and does not designate Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. The government of Venezuela does not either. The government of Bangladesh does not either. The government of Pakistan does not either. The government of Iran does not either. The government of Russia does not either. The government of China, which represents 1.4 billion people, ostensibly, does not designate these groups in the same way. Therefore, we can say that the vast majority of humanity are represented by governments who do not perceive this issue in the same way. They do not perceive Palestinians resisting their own dispossession as terrorism. We have to be brave. History favors the brave, and now is that time, without a doubt. But what we also have to be aware of is the extent to which the state within which we live, which is responsible for administering many aspects of our lives, has undergone a process of integration with Israeli intelligence across the last 30 years. What do I mean by that? I mean that today, when the British police use spyware to hack people's phones, they use a company called Celebrite. Now, Celebrite was founded by alumni of Unit 8200 within the Israeli military. This is the Signals Communications Surveillance Unit, the equivalent of GCHQ. In addition to that, British police, when they undertake investigations, they use something called NICE Systems. NICE Systems is a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms company. In addition to that, the very information that the Home Office that the Ministry of Defense and that the NHS handles, it goes through a company called Oracle. Who and what is Oracle? Oracle was founded by the 7th richest man in the world, Larry Ellison, in order to service the CIA. But Larry Ellison is the largest donor to the Israeli military in the history of the Friends of the IDF organization. And in addition to that, Larry Ellison offered the directorship of the organization which handles the data of the Ministry of Defense to Benjamin Netanyahu. It would have been conceivable that this sensitive information handled by the Ministry of Defense could be put directly into the hands of Netanyahu through this organization, Oracle. What is Britain's involvement in this war? Britain has a secret military agreement with Israel which it refuses to make public. We have seen 33 flights of UK military planes throughout this month going from its base in Cyprus to Tel Aviv. We have also seen that British base in Cyprus used for US flights to transport weapons directly to aid the Israelis in what they are doing. Make no mistake, what's happening in Gaza is different from all the other wars we've lived through. Why? Because it is a British and Israeli and US war with direct participation of the world's most powerful army. Not only is Britain helping in that way, they are intercepting signals communication through their base in Cyprus of resistance forces in Gaza and giving it back to the Israelis. The US have mobilized the Delta Force on the ground with the Israelis. The US have sent mercenaries that have been active in Ukraine to go and fight on the ground with the Israelis. And despite that, even on the first day when they attempted the incursion into Gaza, the reports from high-ranking US officials was that their troops were torn to pieces. US troops torn to pieces in Gaza. Why? Allahu Akbar. Because this is a US war. That's what has to be understood very clearly by all of us here. That the United States and Britain and Israel operate as a trilateral security state. Now, in the case of where we are operating in a state which operates hand in hand with Israel. However, there are ways in which loopholes can be found in the law of the land here. So Britain is a signator to the Arms Trade Treaty, which states that if you have any reason to believe that your arms export could be used for a violation of international humanitarian law, then you must not take that decision to export those arms. Therefore, you have a legal case for the shutting down of Israeli arms factories which exist in this society. And it is something that organizations like Palestine Action have been doing for several years. You have seen hundreds of times arms factories in this country that directly supply the Israeli army over the last 3 years shut down. And 2 of those sites have been permanently vacated, including the headquarters of Elbit Systems in Keir Starmer's constituency of Holborn. Including in Oldham, you had a subsidiary of Elbit Systems which was shut down and permanently vacated and sold at a loss by that company, thanks to these forms of operations. And when people have entered the court, they have made the very clear argument that criminal damage to avoid war crimes is no crime. And in the vast majority of the cases, around 96% of the cases, you have seen people found not guilty and acquitted. Ultimately, right now, the Israel lobby and the Home Office are attempting to apply pressure to not only the police, but also the CPS to pursue prosecution of those of us that support Palestine. And you are dealing with the very integrity of these governmental institutions. There is a battle for the soul of these institutions happening right now on the issue of Britain's willingness to be servile to Israel. And so those who take these actions against these arms factories are protected to some extent by the juries that they will be put in front of. Remember that you are not only with the majority of humanity. I think it's safe to say that even a sizable proportion of this population are on the side of the Palestinians. And so if you enter a court accused of preventing war crimes by shutting down a factory, you are likely to find yourself in front of a jury that will no doubt sympathize with you. What is also essential to understand is that this community, whether it's Luton or other communities around Bedford, you have the presence of arms factories that are directly supplying the Israeli military. Now, however, maximum pressure can be applied to those places. It should be applied. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to take any form of legal risk. It means that work in ways to apply maximum pressure. That could be making pamphlets which you hand out to the local people around the factories. That could be you set up a stall in local towns to show people what is happening in those factories. But maximum pressure must be applied to these pressure points. What Israel perceives in this society as expressions of strength are actually pressure points that when a small amount of energy is pushed towards them, sometimes they react like an open door. Now, just before I finish, there is one last point that needs to be emphasized. While this great outpouring of support will be welcomed by billions across the planet, you also have those that will now be procuring funding to specifically psychologically manipulate, suppress, subvert this energy, and particularly in our community. There are organizations that are currently being pushed into schools with the sole purpose of trying to quell this energy. One such example is an organization called Solutions, Not Sides. Now, many of you may have heard of this organization, but it is active in British schools now on the basis of dealing with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But actually it is there in order to beautify the image of Israel. This organization shares funders with settlements, illegal settlements in the West Bank. It shares funders with the Friends of the IDF, shares funders with the Conservative Party, and it shares funders with Keir Starmer also. This organization, Solutions Not Sides, was started by One Voice, which is an anti-BDS organization in the States, which describes its own activity as the best way to undermine the campaign to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Now, Solutions Not Sides, according to my investigations, has had, the parent organization of it, One Voice, has had at least 28 employees who are formerly Israeli military or intelligence personnel. In addition to that, this organization, One Voice, has had 3 employees who were simultaneously employed by the Israeli government. There will be organizations that are aiming to get control of your mind, to get control of your ideas, and to somehow dampen your spirit of support towards the Palestinians. We must think critically. We must build a literacy about what these organizations want, how they operate, and the ways in which they will seek to influence not only us, but younger generations of our families. Palestine is non-negotiable. We are a pivotal generation in this history. We are on the brink of a Nakba bigger than the Nakba of 1948. Now, when our grandchildren say to us, where were we when this happened? I don't want to say that I wasn't in jail or dead. Do you understand? These are the stakes. These are the stakes. Thank you.